Redemption. CENTCOM, Biosciences Complex, Labs, 67 minutes ago. Inside the biolabs, at the heart of humanity's last stab at survival, a lone man waited, Aliyev the Kazakh. Outside, the battle raged. Beyond this large white womb, up against the walls of the beleaguered fortress. It was like being in the belly of the whale. If the whale were thrashing around in a tsunami, one that was going to wipe out the entire world. There had been no word from the missions to get the H-rig and other shit Aliyev needed, not that anyone was likely to tell him if there was, or tell him anything for that matter. The fabrication facility was running balls out, churning out doses of vaccine in their tens of thousands. Simon Park, having turned rapidly into quite a little martinet, czar of his own bio-fiefdom, was off riding herd on his white-coated douche platoon. And there was absolutely nothing for Oleg Aliyev to do but sit there in the lab and literally watch MZ grow. This is bullshit, the Kazakh thought. Bullshit in a hat. After his hero's journey across half the heaving globe, he was supposed to at least be the damned hero. Odysseus killing all those assholes and getting his wife back, Grendel beating the shit out of Beowulf, Luke destroying the Death Star, then kissing his sister. Now here he was, little more than a glorified botanist staring at mold in a culturing table. He was the fucking true green lawn care guy. Except without the boots. He'd been barefoot ever since his own boot soles, half melted in the flaming zombie pathogen grenade extravaganza at his dacha, had finally come off, nearly dooming him to an early undeath just outside the bio-warehouse. After singing the virtues of Durex sheaths, or whatever ass-stomping brand of boot he personally wore, Simon had tried to convince him to at least take some footwear off a dead man. But it was too fucking creepy, and Aliyev never left the lab anyway, so he'd just gone around barefoot. Looking up from the culturing table, he regarded the empty labs area and its total absence of anyone else to even talk to. Everyone was either in the warehouse, in the fab facility, or else ferrying shit out of the plane. Hadn't he spent enough time alone in a damned empty lab talking to himself? Could have saved myself a very awkward fucking journey and stayed back in the dacha. At least back there he had scotch, and porn, and Tool. Instead of 10,000 days, now he was listening to somewhere in the distance what sounded like an artillery barrage. What the fuck was that? No one told him anything. Nobody was even around to ask. He decided that hiding out alone in this clean white room was doing his head in. He needed to get out of there, get some air, see what the fuck was going on. He stood up, grabbed his Benelli, and cinched up his bug-out bag, which he hadn't taken off since finding himself in a funky foxtrot haunted house lock-in, completely out of shotgun shells. He looked across the surface of the desk behind him at a radio Park had taken off one of the dead British soldiers, presumably because a radio had been another conspicuous absence from their extravagantly lit all-night warehouse electro-rave. Aliyev suddenly remembered how a dying Russian radio had saved his life not long ago. So he picked this one up with its attached headset and shoved the tangle in his pocket. He didn't know how it worked. But I'm a fucking scientist. I'll figure it out. He emerged into the wet night air to the distant sounds of whooping and shouting. What the ever-living fuck was that? Evidently some kind of fucked-up post-apocalyptic rodeo had replaced the artillery barrage. He was still totally clueless. But at least now he could see more than a white wall in front of his face and dishes of growing mold. Out in front of Bio, he found the Hargeisa vaccine bucket brigade still hard at work loading the plane, which was at least more exciting, but they were too rushed and focused to pay any attention to him. Less expectedly, there was a huge group of soldiers forming some kind of medieval-ass phalanx in front of the bio-complex, and also in front of the plane, to the accompaniment of the sounds of Armageddon and bull riding outside the walls. But they also didn't pay him much attention, as Aliyev slipped around their cordon and out into the dark of the common. It was funny how you could go anywhere you wanted if you looked like you knew what you were doing, plus carried a fucking shotgun. So he was at least out of the last greatest show on Earth, as he'd come to think of it, that stupid giant circus tent. But now he was getting rained on. Inside, at least he'd been dry. As usual, you never appreciated what you had. Or Aliyev didn't anyway. He could hear the noise of a helicopter from somewhere, hardly even overhead, but low to the ground, out beyond the walls, and he definitely couldn't see it. He thought of his beautiful destroyed Eurocopter, which he had auto-rotated down to safety in Moscow. He had skills, man. He used to have his own adventures. Yeah, it had completely sucked at the time, but it was pretty damned awesome in retrospect and the anesthetic haze of memory. He remembered reading somewhere that was the funny thing about travel, that there must have been moments when Odysseus, years after his return from the Trojan War, relaxed on a sofa with a glass of wine in his hand and muttered to Penelope, "You know, that was actually a pretty sweet trip." Anyway, it had at least been his own adventure, and it definitely beat standing out in a field by himself in the fucking rain, barefoot. So much for getting some air. He'd have to settle for trying to find out what the hell was going on, and a change of scenery, and getting back the fuck out of the rain. He set off for the handful of lights he could see on the 4-story SHQ building up against the prison, but even as he did, he could just make out what looked like a big knot of people exiting it stage left and disappearing to the north. In another few minutes, he was walking in the front door himself, shaking off the rain like a wet dog. No one was in evidence. He took the stairs up to the top level, to the JOC, where he'd been once before to help plan the mission to get the H-rig, back when people listened to him, and he did shit. "I'm doing stuff, Laurie. Things." But when he walked in the door of the JOC, not only was there no one inside, the goddamned lights weren't even on. Was this it? Lights out for the world? Was he the last one out? But as he scanned the darkness and monitor glow, he saw there actually was one person in there. A cute one. That lively British female soldier who had helped plan the mission. She looked like she was gazing back at him from inside a dream, and for some reason he doubted she knew anything about what the hell was going on around here. Fuck it, I'll go up and see for myself. He walked across the big room to the stairwell door and went inside and up, emerging out onto the roof. Back into the rain, just with a better view. But as soon as he got it, he wished he didn't have it. That was typical, too. But it turned out knowing what the hell was going on was overrated, at least around here. At least tonight. What's going on is also bullshit. Also in a hat. Beyond the chocolate starfish shape of the prison buildings, he could see the fight raging out on the north walls. He wasn't sure what it would look like to successfully defend a prison against all the dead overrunning the entire world, but this probably wasn't it. However that was going to turn out, it looked like it was going to turn out that way pretty soon. And then shit suddenly got worse. Whistling overhead was punctuated by explosions behind him. Aliyev turned to see walking blossoms of flame in the night, behind the south motherfucking walls. They were now clearly motherfucking surrounded. But still, it was a beautiful sight, the booms sounding a full 2 seconds after the blossoms of flame. Everything was kind of peaceful at a distance. Somehow. Doubling down on his failure to figure out what was happening, our strategy was no good and we stuck with it, to borrow an old phrase. Aliyev dug out the radio he'd grabbed, got the headset on and powered it up. And he started flipping around channels as he had done many times before, first in his beautifully appointed living room with snow falling outside, and later in his giant T-15 Armata tank coffin with dead hands falling all over it. And he started listening in on men in combat. Listening in on the end. Go. Bid. E. Aliyev squinted, trying to make out the transmission. All of the other channels he tried were staticky, the voices of panicked, urgent, or angry local soldiers, squad leaders, or commanders coming through muffled but intelligible. However, this one sounded like the local access TV station had gone off the air 3 hours ago. It sounded like a longer-range transmission. It sounded like the one he had intercepted from the JFK. Blind. Fuck. It went out again. Nothing but auditory confetti. Aliyev fished the radio itself out of his pocket and held it up over his head. Even as he did so, he felt the rain slacken slightly and a breeze pick up. He was already looking up at the radio, and behind it, he could see a section of black, storm-socked sky slowly lighten, and then a tiny patch actually cleared away, and through it, Aliyev could see a couple of stars. I repeat, this is Rabbit 2 transmitting in the blind. And the next 15 seconds were scratchy but totally intelligible. Aliyev even recognized the damn voice, the blonde soldier or sailor with the eagle and anchor insignia on his uniform. This had to be a message from the mission to get the H-rig. When it finished, having efficiently and clearly conveyed their mission status, shit out of luck evidently, and their exact location, deep in the shit clearly, Aliyev rotated the radio until he found a rubberized button and pressed it, angling the chin mic on the headset with his other hand. "Hello, I can hear you. Hello, can you hear me? Hello." Nothing came back. He looked to the sky. The stars were gone. Aliyev scanned the end of the world all around him. Had anyone else heard that? He rapidly flipped through channels. Certainly no one was talking about sending out another helicopter to rescue the H-rig mission from failure and certain death. Shit. He turned and ran back downstairs. Now there was no one at all in the JOC, totally empty. Shit on toast. He ran back up onto the rooftop, got on the radio and started hailing Fick, Wesley, that asshole colonel, the hot blonde English helicopter pilot, whoever. But he had no idea what channel anybody was on, or even what the numbered channels on this radio meant. On top of that, every frequency with voices on it was chaos already, plus staticky, and no one seemed to pay him any attention. Well, one guy told him to stay the fuck off that channel, which was at least familiar. But that was it. Aliyev scanned the ground below and all around him again. Everyone was fighting everywhere on all sides. It looked like every man to the damned walls. Except, no. Wait. Now guys were running down off the south walls. And yep, dead were coming over it right behind them. That didn't look good. That looked bad. He scanned around the common until his eye fell upon a single helicopter parked alone out there on the grass. Oh no, Tovarish Doctor. Even you're not that stupid. And then another voice played in his head, one from out of memory, clear and perfect like a recording. It was that hot blonde helo pilot back in that mission planning session. "There's a flyable Puma on the deck left over from the Dusseldorf mission. It'll have some fuel in it." This helo he saw now down there had to be the one. "God damn you, hot blonde English pilot chick." His own voice played in his head, from 10 minutes ago. "I've got skills. I used to have adventures." He sighed. "God damn you, asshole Kazakh survivalist bioweaponeer and bringer of the apocalypse, and truly shitty amateur helicopter pilot." He remembered something else from that meeting. Not only was this the last helo, but there were also no more helo pilots. There was only him. Only him, and a whole lot of dead guys running around below in that dark and rain-swept common. And more every second Aliyev stood here on his dick. And not just dead, but runners, like the ones who had run him to ground in Red Square. And suddenly, shoulders sagging, Aliyev wasn't sure he could face that shit again. Suddenly he felt very tired. Suddenly, it all seemed to catch up with him. The months of work in the lab on his ill-fated and hopeless vaccine design, then on undead killer pathogen design, then on successful but worthless undead killer pathogen vaccine design. Then the madcap flight from his overrun, burning, exploding dacha, the fridge of death, and the adjacent flammable crate of motherfucking grenades, the point-blank shootout with the dipshit Cossacks in a field somewhere in the fetid womb of Mother Russia, the crash landing, the duathlon in Red Square, running and shooting, with the other runners also his targets, getting trapped in a tank, getting dragged out of the tank by the Spetsnaz wolf pack, having the shit pounded out of him by the Alpha Wolf, rescue by Brits, open-air grenade throwing, getting trapped in a building, getting trapped in a warehouse, with a foxtrot, with brain damage. And in the end, he also finally realized none of that mattered. It didn't matter what he'd suffered or overcome up until now. It didn't matter in the least how tired he managed to convince himself he was. And finally, with a great wave of deflation, he realized, if you want to take the hero's journey, you actually have to be the motherfucking hero. You had to choose to do so, even when you didn't feel like it. You had to risk getting killed, or killed and eaten, or eaten alive, or worse. And as he continued to stand there on his dick, Aliyev also saw it was not just runners down there. There were also at least a few foxtrots in the mix. Shit, he thought. I'll never make it, even if I try. Was he going to try? Did he actually have anything heroic in him? He doubted it. But then he looked up and around him again. Far to the north he could see London. Burning. Overrun. The world's last great city getting a lot less great really fast. This was it. These were the end times. And it was, of course, all his fucking fault. He had done this. He had more or less single-handedly caused the end of the world. His greed, his fecklessness, his diabolical skill, great power used for great evil, inability to care about anything more than himself. It was just about the worst thing anyone had ever done. It was a terrible sin. But now, God had given him one chance to make it right. Wait, what the fuck? Did I just think that? Aliyev didn't believe in God. Of course he didn't, just as, of course, there wasn't any God. One quick look around and 2 seconds of reflection made that fact obvious. But maybe something had put him here, in this spot, at this moment. It was a hell of a feat of positioning, not to mention timing, and maybe it was for a reason. Maybe this was what he had been counting on, living for, flying across the world for. Maybe this was that chance to save his immortal soul. He looked down at the shit show in the common again. Nope. Still too scared. Plus tired. A drink, a cigarette, an affair, a nap. Those sounded better. And hell, on top of all that, he also suddenly remembered, very belatedly but perhaps not fatally too late, that half the team out there he was considering getting his ass killed trying to rescue actually consisted of... Yeah, that motherfucking psycho bitch killer ice queen woman with the horror movie boot knife, and who had not figuratively but literally and unmistakably totally promised to murder his ass and put him in the ground should both of them somehow manage to survive to the end of this thing. What kind of fucked up death wish having masochistic loser would go so far out of his way to rescue his own designated fucking assassin? No. Just fuck no. Because no. And then to what would probably be his very short-lived regret. He turned and looked back to the fight on the north walls again. There were a lot of soldiers standing up there behind those ramparts, and they all looked kind of samey to Aliyev. But one group on the left caught his eye. It was a smaller group than those in the center or on the right, and one that seemed somehow tighter-knit. They also seemed really tired. But they were fighting as hard as anyone else. And then, not even knowing how, Aliyev recognized them, or convinced himself he did. Somehow he knew those were the Royal Marines, the same men who had come for him in Moscow, who had flown their own asses halfway around the world, a lot farther than a few miles across central London, to come rescue his sorry ass, and who had fought through a lot more than a couple 100 meters of overrun backyard. No, they'd fought through hell, down to the bottom level of an underground bunker manned by Aquila and his entire wolf pack, solely to pull his sorry, tied-up ass out of it. They had risked and sacrificed a hell of a lot more than Aliyev ever had, or was being asked to now, or probably ever would. And as he watched them, even now, still fighting, practically hand-to-hand on those walls, he remembered how they had never given up or given in. Not even when things looked darkest, or even totally hopeless, in that shit show in Red Square. Somehow they had battled through it all, murdering the crap out of a massively superior force of Spetsnaz alpha killers through pure skill, will, resourcefulness, and their absolute determination not to fail. Why had they done all that? Aliyev asked himself now. Moreover, how had they done that? Where had they found such strength to go on? The courage to face nearly certain death, the unshakable determination to prevail. But even as he asked it, Aliyev knew the answer. It was because they believed. They believed in something bigger than themselves, and because they were determined to save their homes and loved ones, and knew they were the only ones who could do it. He remembered overhearing their officer say something about how a hero was one who sacrificed himself to save others. In the end, it was because they were heroes. And not all of them had made it back out of that bunker, or out of Red Square. Some were still buried with Lenin and Aquila in that dead flooded tomb. Others lay dead back in that barricaded building, or else trapped back in that overrun square, left behind, probably forever. And now Aliyev had to ask himself, was he so much less heroic than those men? Almost certainly. But could less be asked of him? No. He owed more. He owed those Marines big time. He owed everybody. He just needed some fucking shoes first. But one thing the post-apocalypse didn't lack for was dead people. Aliyev found one right outside SHQ, facing down in the dripping grass. After pressing his foot against one sole for size, he leaned down and unlaced both boots. But when he pulled the first one off, he froze in horror as he saw the Bates stamp on the heel and DuraShock's tag on the cuff. Hands trembling, he rolled the body over. Thank fuck. It wasn't Simon. It was just kick-ass boots. Rock. He pulled off the other one, then both socks, then retreated back up against the building to get them on. There weren't any dead close to here yet, but the last thing he wanted to do was finish the end of the world, not to mention fail the hero's journey forever by getting taken down tying his fucking shoes. With a wall to his back, he paused to check the inside tag. Exactly his size. Ha! God is giving me this chance, bitches. A few seconds later, he was shod, plus had his good old trusty motherfucking Benelli tactical and his bug-out bag, from which he'd already filled his pockets with shotgun shells. Now he was just looking at a quick run over open ground to reach that helicopter. He'd definitely done shit like this before. Tear-assing away from the dead, getting helicopters in the air in the midst of chaos. It was all old hat for him. He took off. Utilizing his mad shotgun skills, painstakingly honed under pressure, he eliminated the faces of 1, 2, 3 running dead guys who looked at him the wrong way. Ha-ha, motherfuckers, buckshot shampoo. Surprisingly quickly, he was within sight of the helo. This definitely beat doing circles around Red Square with nowhere to go. He shoved a few shells in the loading port while he covered the last stretch. Because shotgun shells. Oof! He went face down into the mud, hard, the weight of some heavy, dead, mean bastard pressing him down like it was trying to give him a decent burial. Alive. And then, motherfucker! The thing bit into his motherfucking scalp, which smarted like a motherfucker. Freaking out and wriggling like an electric eel, Aliyev tried to get out from under this fucker, which he knew with every cell he had to do fast. But he was giving up a good 60 pounds to the guy, and the mud was making it impossible to gain any purchase, and the dude was gnawing on his fucking head, which made it a little hard to focus. And then gunfire rang out. The biting stopped, and hands rolled the body off him, then rolled him over. And now it actually was Simon, looking down at him with concern and offering him a hand up. Bugging out on us? As if. Aliyev explained his mission to rescue the H-rig mission in as few syllables as possible while running with the others to the helicopter, climbing in the open side cargo door, clambering into the cockpit, then trying to face the annoying problem of starting the goddamn thing. The controls were somewhat like his Eurocopter, but also not really. Then again, he could enjoy the relaxing experience of figuring them out without the imminent threat of being incinerated by an exploding fuel tank underneath him, breathing weaponized anthrax and Ebola, or watching dead Mongols French kiss his cockpit glass inches from his face. "Wish you could come with me," Aliyev shouted. And he did. You trusted who you'd fought with. They'd kept each other alive in that warehouse. "Me too," Simon shouted back. "Anyway, this is for me to do." "You sure?" Aliyev actually smiled. "I got this." Aliyev took his hands off the cyclic and collective on his side, and as Ali climbed and banked the aircraft, she could feel the Kazakh looking at her awkwardly from her right side. Letting out a deep exhalation, she said, "You suck ass as a pilot, Oleg." But then she also glanced over and gave him a softer look. One that said barely perceptibly that just maybe he didn't suck quite so hard as a human being. He had, after all, just saved their asses. Now get the fuck out of my cockpit.